7 o'clock, so I'll call tonight's city council meeting to order. And Karen, could we have a roll call, please?
Councilmember Husnick.
Here.
Councilmember Byström. Councilmember Munson.
Here.
Councilmember Valento.
Here.
Mayor Bain.
Here. I would like to invite everyone to rise and join us for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Members of council, we have an agenda before you this evening. I will entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor signal by saying aye.
Aye.
Oppose? And our agenda is approved. Our next item this evening is open forum. Open forum is any interested party's opportunity to address council on any topic that you would like. And let's see if we have anybody signed up for open forum today. Nobody signed up. Is there anybody that would like to speak in open forum this evening? This is your opportunity to speak if you would like to. All right, seeing no one, we will bring conversation back to council. And council, for your consideration is the consent agenda this evening. We have consent agenda items 6A through 6F, and I will entertain a motion or any changes.
Madam Mayor, I have a motion that we approve consent agenda 6A through 6F.
I'll second.
Motion and a second. All those in favor signal by saying aye.
Aye.
Oppose? And consent agenda is approved. We will move on to our regular agenda this evening. Our first item tonight is item 7A, which is a resolution accepting a donation from the Forest Lake Baseball Association. And Jamie is not here, but do I see Abby
Yeah, I'm gonna
prepping?
take this
All
one.
right.
So as noted in the staff report, Forest Lake Baseball Association has indicated they would like to donate to the city 2 different improvements out at Cooling Camp Field. One would be a shed. It's a sizable structure to house equipment for them out at the fields. And another one would be for, sorry guys, new dugouts. And so this would be associated with Field 1. That's just the first one right when you come in. And the new dugouts, currently we just have a flat bench area, and we'd actually have around that bench nice little fencing and a little overhang to help protect the players from the elements out at that site. So in addition to, or tonight, what the request before you is to consider the donation, and so you'd move to approve the resolution, and then whether or not the council is favorable to the waiver of 2 different fees. One would be the fee associated with the fencing, that's a $50 permit fee, and the other one is a little less than $300 for building permit fees. Staff is making the recommendation to move to approve both of those requests tonight. Given the nominal nature of the building permit and the improvement going in that they are donating, we believe that this is a really reasonable waiver of those fees. Any questions for me?
Do Abby, any questions for Abby from council? Otherwise, resolution for consideration is 9/12/2201.
Mayor Bain, I'll make a motion to adopt resolution number 09-12-22-01, a resolution accepting the donation of Cooling Camp Park improvements with gratitude.
There's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
A motion and a second. Any discussion on this item? Hearing none, I guess I'll just state appreciation to the Forest Lake Baseball Association for making these improvements, and happy to be a continued partner on all the great things that you do for kids. So I'm happy to support this evening and really appreciate all of their efforts. With that, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor signal by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And motion carries. Next item this evening is a resolution 9/12/2202, construction of well 6 and well 7 project award. And Ryan.
Mayor, City Council, in your packet is bid results and award recommendation for construction of well 7 and well 6 improvements. Just a little background on this project. Might be one of your little projects you guys have seen come through, but it takes a lot of things to go to be completed to get to this step tonight in regards to have a adequate supply of water in our system here. So just some things that, we had to do. We originally were doing some initial test pumping in the south end of town where we were first primarily looking for this future facility. We weren't successful, so we had to cease operations in those locations, and then we moved up to where the existing water tower is here off of 210th. And that then became a favorable site, and then that's where, obviously we're in construction of the new water treatment plants, but you still got to get water supplied to the water treatment plant. So, upon then working through the existing well, what we call well 6, which is the old township well that's being improved to be a part of well 6 and 7 of this project. So you'll have 2 municipal wells that are approximately 250 feet deep. Well capacity is about 1,500 gallons per minute each. So those are very high service pumps. And we'll be able to supply additional 250 to 300 million gallons of water per year to serve the growth and the redundancy in the system for fire safety and emergency purposes. Each well will be 100% redundant. That means we don't run the wells at the same time. So if there is a maintenance issue here and we have to fix or deal with one of the wells, the whole treatment plant and well can still operate at the capacity we just talked about, while the other one's getting fixed. There ever is a maintenance issue. And then, once you find all the site and you start going through a lot of the permitting stuff too, DNR obviously is very strict on the permitting on, penetrating aquifers and increasing your appropriation. So we're being required to install a DNR observation well. So that's within that project bid as well. So tonight's, upon opening 3 bids on August 23rd, Mineral Service Plus LLC was the low bid, with a bid of $545,830, and it's our recommendation to award them the project per resolution 9/12/2202. So with that, I will open up any questions you might have.
Thank you, Ryan. Council, any questions that we may have of Ryan this evening?
Well, it's always tough to know exactly what's going on with engineering. We really have to rely on your your expertise. So based on
Right.
that,
Go ahead.
based on that, Madam Mayor, I'd make a motion that we adopt resolution 09-12-22-02, the construction of well 6 and well 7 project award to the Mineral Service Plus LLC to the tune of $545,830.
The motion, is there a second?
I'll second.
We'll take a second from Councilmember Valento. Before we call the vote, just real quick, Ryan, I know we've had a lot of projects that we're seeing increasing costs. Can you just recap where we landed on this compared to original project budget?
This project is about 56,000 above when we originally estimated it. We've been working with Kevin and trying to identify that in the capital improvement plan because we knew with the water improvement projects, we were going to have to look at revenues to fund some of that regardless. But this is a good bid based on, where pricing is at now. With the 545, there are alternative bid items in that base bid. So, obviously this contractor is going to be due option 1, so you're still not going to hit that full amount of the contractor's payment that the award is for, unless we obviously run into some unforeseen conditions and have to work through those. But here, the bid's higher than what the estimate was when we planned for originally, but we are hoping for some additional savings on some of the contract items, but there are some additional stuff in here that we would have never thought would have been required, such as the DNR observation well that is going to be required of this project, when both these wells that we're dealing with do the same thing that the other well that the DNR is making us install that's a few hundred feet away. So that's some of the stuff that has been built into this project that wasn't originally scoped or would have never been anticipated.
Good, thank you for that. Any other questions? Patrick, go ahead.
Just a point of information before we go forward. As you recall, we came before the council earlier this year regarding all the water projects, and just to remind you all that being with the cost, not particularly on this one, but all the water projects being well above based on supply shortages and material costs, that we will be bonding, and we'll cover that when we go through the utility funds next Monday, to cover some of the costs related to not only these wells, but also the treatment plant.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? We do have a motion and a second on the table. With that, we'll call the vote. All those in favor signal by saying aye.
Aye.
Oppose, and motion carries. Next item this evening, item 7C, the administrative assistant, new hire, and Kevin.
Yes, Mayor and City Council, the Finance Department currently has a vacancy as an administrative one assistant accounts payable. We conducted interviews and got a good pool of candidates, and one rose to the top. And through that, we are recommending that Laura Dittenberner for the position and being hired at a grade 5, step 2 at $29.45 an hour.
Very good. Thank you, Kevin. And just to confirm, this is filling a previous, this is not new headcount, but filling a previous.
Correct. It was filling a vacancy, yep.
Council, any questions, comments? Happy to entertain a motion if anyone's ready.
I'll make a motion to approve the new hire of Administrative Assistant 1.
The motion, is there a second?
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signal by saying aye. Aye. Oppose, and motion carries. Move on to 7D, which is a city planner new hire. Abby.
The Community Development Department has a vacant city planner position. This is an existing position that was vacated by Donovan Hart over a year ago. The position is called City Planner / Zoning Administrator, so that's just where you kind of see that tweak. After a successful application submittal process, review, and interviews, we've determined Ken Roberts is our great selection, and we're very thrilled to have him join the team. So staff is recommending the council approve the hiring of Ken Roberts for the position of city planner at grade 9, step 3.
Good. Thank you, Abby.
Yep.
Council, any questions you may have? I do have one. So the position of Donovan's been vacant for about a year and has been filled by, I think, 2 Bolton and Mink resources. What is the transition plan of, new staff coming in and kind of transition with Franny and Nathan?
We will be transitioning Nathan and Franny out. It won't be a hard, Mr. Roberts will start on the 29th of this month. It's not going to be a cold stop with Nathan and Franny. I really have relied on them. The city has really been relying on them to keep those zoning operations. So they are going to help kind of with that transition. Imagine you probably won't see them anymore at public meetings starting in October. If you're in the office, you may see them a day here and there to help kind of train Ken in, get us up to speed. Right now, between now and the end of September, they're really starting to focus quite a bit on cleaning up the files that they've been working on, making sure the city has all of the documents they've produced while they've been working with us, and also retweaking any processes and procedures that they've identified as maybe needing some help. So there will be some transition probably for the month of October. And then additionally, we will continue to utilize Nathan and Franny in a bill back world. So if we're working on development related projects that maybe our workload is high or something, we might pull them in to serve as kind of that primary point of contact for us.
Perfect. They've both had just fantastic feedback from developers in the community and the interactions they've had. They've done great work. So thank you for that, Bolton and Mink. And then just wanted to make sure that we've got a smooth handoff. Ultimately, I support this move. This is function that the city we need to own. This needs to be part of our process, but want to make sure that it's a smooth transition. So thanks to everyone involved. Other questions, comments related to this position? With that, I would motion that council approve the new hire for the city planner hiring Ken Roberts as the position of city planner, grade 9, step 3.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor signal by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Oppose? Motion carries. And welcome. We look forward to working together. Welcome. All right, that ends our planned action agenda for this evening, for our regular agenda. We are going to move into, we have 2 workshop topics on the agenda this evening. And just a quick note on the workshop topics, this is a working session of council. Anything that we talk about tonight that requires official action will come before council at a future meeting for official action. This is just a working session. And with that, let's transition into the mobile food vendor discussion. And I think, Abby, are you walking us through this?
I am, thank you. So the city of Forest Lake does not have any code provisions that allow for mobile food vendors. I think there may have been a time period, maybe during COVID, when the city had relaxed its provisions to allow for some options. I'm not sure the history, as I can still claim I'm new here and I can only piece together so much. But recently we started to do some enforcement efforts on mobile food vendors, and that's when kind of all of this information really came to light. In our enforcement efforts, we do have 2 food vendors that are permanently stationed in places in the downtown area. When they were notified to move, both of them submitted petitions to the city council requesting the city council consider changing its ordinances to allow for food vendors. And one of them even indicating to allow for the food vendors to not have to move. So former zoning administrator Hart would ask food vendors to move every so many days. One of the food vendors is asking, can we permanently set up shop in this location? So this is what would be called a zoning text amendment. So both of those inquiries were in your packet. One of them included a list of people that were in support of the amendment. There's another table item for you tonight, another list that was provided by Xiomara. She had included that in the beginning, but there was a bunch of phone numbers and I didn't know how to redact them. So you have them now. The phone numbers are redacted from the public record. But we really wanted to make sure that they wanted you to know that there's public support for this use within the community. So this is a process that would be known as a zoning text amendment. Zoning text amendments can happen either way. One, you can react to a zoning text amendment that is initiated by an applicant. Under those circumstances, the city would direct an applicant to create the law, and then it would be vetted through the planning commission, who would make recommendation to you. Under a different scenario, the city can take the lead on creating a zoning text amendment. In that circumstance, we have quite a bit more control over that amendment. But ultimately, this comes down to the question for the council is whether or not you'd like to explore an ordinance allowing for mobile food vendors. That's kind of the step 1. Then the step 2 is whether or not you'd want that to be a city-initiated amendment. And then really just providing direction to staff so that we can either work with the owners of the mobile food vendors on submitting an application, or we can start working on a timeline for getting an ordinance amendment before the planning commission and city council. Do you have questions for me?
Sure, we will.
They'll come up. Sure.
And so purpose for tonight is you're just gathering some initial input from council and discussion of should we have, or what is the
Yep, I think
what is our direction
it's a
to you?
2-part question. The first one is the council interested in an ordinance of this nature? Do you want to allow for food trucks or mobile food vendors in Forest Lake? If that's a hard no, and now you're not taking the actual official action, we'd still need an ordinance amendment that would prohibit them effectively, but you'd be directing staff to draft something of that nature. Then if it is not a hard no, then that second question is, do we want that to be a city-led amendment? And if so, directing staff to start working on that, putting it in our timeline, working with the planning commission on standards for those types of uses within the community.
Mobile, so maybe the first question is, do we want to allow for, do we want to consider an ordinance that would allow for? Can we just, before we ask that question, can we just step back? And I just want to make sure I understand the kind of the existing law of what's in place. And so because we don't specifically allow for it, is it assumed that it's prohibited? Is that?
That is correct.
That is correct. And because it is currently prohibited, what is the enforcement path? Like, what is, I know we've sent letters and we've done some like knock on the door and talk to people, but what is the next step? Like, what actually is the enforcement avenue? And what's allowed today for that path in absence of us taking action to allow for it?
So far, right now, we're in the door knocking, letter writing, please move your vehicle. The next step, though, I think I would probably defer to the city attorney because it's a little different.
Yeah.
But the next step usually in a standard enforcement, after we've written a number of letters or talked with the owner and we haven't seen changes, some sort of citation. Pete could probably speak more specifically in these circumstances.
Good evening, Your Honor, members of council. This is a little bit different of a code enforcement challenge because it's not a piece of property that's just sitting in one place. But the civil remedies would include injunctive relief and having the court issue an order and it's supervising to ensure that its order is complied with, or if the police department or the prosecutor felt like it merited criminal action, it is a misdemeanor to violate the code.
Okay. So it could be a criminal action. It could head down a criminal path if we chose to take enforcement action. It's what I was trying to, is this a civil question or is this a criminal question? And
Your Honor, I'm limited in that I can't speak to the criminal path in terms of whether or not that discretion should or would be exercised or under what conditions.
understood.
But it is a misdemeanor to violate the code as a standard principle of the entire code. This is not specific to food trucks.
Understood. And then if we were, and then the violation, is it the violation of the food truck owner and the operator of the food truck, or is it a violation of the property owner who is allowing that property to be used in a manner that's outside of code?
It's an excellent question, Your Honor. It's theoretically possible that there could be two separate violations happening at the same time. The violation we're talking about is the operator of the truck.
Okay.
Storing a vehicle like that could
Do
be
we
a
need to
violation.
address the property owners? And I asked that question because one of my observations of the use of food trucks in Forest Lake that makes us different than Chicago or New York, where you've got them lined on city streets and they're using public infrastructure, and you see a lot of code that is around the use of public infrastructure, which to me is different than if somebody is parked on a private parking lot. And that's more of the use that we see today and more of what the conflict is. It's more of, I see it as a land use question rather than a use of public infrastructure question.
When we were conducting enforcement efforts, we did notify property owners as well.
Okay. So, and it is potentially a violation for a property owner as well. I mean, that is part of what we should be considering. 'Cause- Go ahead.
Pete. Go ahead, Pete.
Your Honor, members of council, yes, that's one thing you should be considering. And I would just amplify a point that Abby made about the things you're considering, talking about standards. If you want to go forward with the Planning Commission, there's an entire range of ways that cities can elect to engage with food trucks, from ultimately permissive to outright prohibited to whatever design you think fits the community.
That's why I'm heading down this path, because I know that, for example, food trucks have been a really popular for events. Somebody will have a graduation party and have the pizza truck show up or the ice cream truck, or somebody will have a certain event that is a one-time thing. And I just want to make sure that if we're going to regulate, that we're allowing for those and we're providing the path for both who might be the sponsoring property owner, but also who might be the operator. Because I just want to make sure that we're being consistent, because by definition, somebody who's mobile needs a place to park, and you can't have one without the other, right?
Your Honor, members of council, if that's the feeling, then that is a strong indication that we should say something in our code about what we want, because right now the code leaves us in a wasteland of we can't allow anything. And so if the majority of council feels as you do, be a good time to start the conversation around where do you want it? Is it an events only thing? Is it certain areas of town? Things like that, that could get the ball rolling for planning and the planning commission.
Okay. So I just wanted to kind of set the stage of, in absence of us doing something, what the current environment is, and I think we've kind of painted that picture. So I'm interested in feedback on, do we want to allow food trucks, and should we start that part of the conversation?
A lot of times the food trucks at a private party are private. I mean, they're hired all right, but they're not open to the public usually in a case like that. So I think we'd have to make sure that we make that distinction. You know, it's a private party. It's a pool party or whatever the case may be. The other thing that I would see would be an issue would be, and I always advocate for the American Legion, where for 4 days they have food vendors sitting there for 4 days. And they've always had control of that whole area because of that. And of course, they charge a fee to kind of promote that. So we'd want to make sure that there's some separation there, because that's been going on for 100 years, at least 100 years. I know that in the past, the discussion is coming up about food vendors being in one spot more than 30 days or whatever the case may be. And it's always been my contention that, you know, we got brick and mortar businesses out there that pay taxes to be where they are, and it hurts. It has to hurt them. There's just no getting around it. And so I'm a little hesitant to have a situation where they can just set up and be there for the summer. To me, that just isn't right. And you know, that I know there's some other issues involved there too. I'm sure that they have to get licensed through the county, I would guess, but that's a food service.
Yeah,
thing
the county
more than
has to
anything.
inspect them for health
Yeah.
and safety.
So that's a different issue, but
So yeah, that is a good side question. So maybe in time to kind of discover now, like what regulation are food trucks already subject to outside of Forest Lake? Is it county? Is it the county that's in charge of health and human service?
Yeah, as far as we know, the county is responsible for the health inspection and health and safety, like any restaurant really. So it's purely a county enforcement that way.
because you could have a temporary food vendor at a church event, for instance. They're cooking hot dogs outside or whatever the case may be, and I think would fall into that category, whether it's a truck or not, you know, because it's temporary and but usually it's associated with, in a case like that, it's usually associated with that congregation or whatever, you know, so we got to make sure that we make some real distinctions on some of this stuff. But yeah, the food vendor thing, I mean, it just, my thing is what it does to the brick and mortar businesses there, so.
Other thoughts on if we should regulate or if we should allow, I guess, or
Yeah,
by non-action prohibiting today? So.
I agree with Sam in the sense of I'm not a huge fan of having the food trucks be permanent in a permanent location, but rather temporary. I do like the idea of food trucks. They're especially becoming more popular. And I think they became more popular with COVID as well. And so, and you know, with the two that we've had in town, you always see lines of people. So it's a popular thing within Forest Lake. I think it's only growing. So I think I would like to see the city take the lead in creating an ordinance.
Mayor Bain, I would agree. I'm definitely not a hard no on this. I'm just curious, as we look at this, and Abby or Patrick, you might have mentioned this, what happens now to them? I mean, there's obviously a lot of support. There is always a line.
Whenever we're working in an enforcement action, when the person that's in violation starts a process to come into conformance, so let's say it's a dilapidated property, and if they start working on their property, we usually hold their enforcement action. They're making a good faith effort to come into conformance. With both of the two vendors in town right now, because they had submitted these letters to you because they wanted to work to try to change that law, we had said, you're welcome to stay at the moment where you're at until we sought some more direction from this council. I would say that until we have an ordinance, and I did explain to both vendors, I'm new here, and you know, it was one of these things that came up, why haven't we enforced this? And so starting that process when at least one of those vendors has been there for quite some time. I think to allow them to continue to be there while we work through this ordinance amendment, pending that it isn't, a very long ordinance amendment, I don't believe that it needs to be or would have to be, I think is very reasonable. Now, if it all of a sudden comes down that we work through an ordinance amendment and it fails, then we would have to proceed with enforcement of removal or moving those, having them move those facilities.
So I'm so also in favor of us having this allowed use. I think personally I've been operating on, because we have kind of had this informal, like every 21 days, we've kind of been operating like it's an allowed use. We, to my knowledge, haven't taken strict enforcement action of shutting anything down. So I'd like us to at least be able to have an ordinance that allows for a transient nature of a food truck. And I think that's an important distinction in that, we recognize that there is, especially in the food industry, it's a challenging business, and there's kind of a nice model of testing a concept in a food truck and having a transient location. And some, keep that food truck model for many years, but it's a food truck. It's not intended to be a restaurant, and it's not intended necessarily to be a permanent fixture. And we don't build infrastructure to support that permanent fixture. And so for that reason, whether it's 14 days or 30 days or whatever we would decide that timeline to be, I would support us implementing something that allows for the transient nature. And I think we also should, because we just pulled up a number of examples of other common uses of food trucks, we should address in our ordinance if there is a difference between use of like on public land versus on private property, and then what is the process for somebody in a, maybe we just completely allow I'd be interested in what the suggested language would be, but to, if it's a one-time event at a residence, that we just allow that, there's nothing that's needed. I don't want to create red tape of people having to, do an application to host. We should just like specifically allow for that, just so that there is a clear path. And then kind of create the structure to allow for what would be a transient type use. That's summarizing kind of what we've said so far.
Yeah, I think there needs to be some sense of direction on any of this. It's going to be fairly complicated, though, I think. I don't want to complicate it, but that's just the way it is when you have, private parties and church events, and you have the Legion or whatever on a temporary basis. So we got to be darn careful that we do it right.
Do we have to head down a licensing path if can we allow for it to be created? Can we allow for it to be for them to exist without requiring a license, or is there automatically, are we on the path on needing a license?
We don't. We can amend our zoning ordinance. We can license them. I think we have a lot of options. Just for members of the council that might not be aware, I did work in Stillwater. We had a pretty comprehensive food truck ordinance that addressed very much a lot of the things I'm hearing from you. You don't want to exclude the church hot dog fundraiser. You don't want to maybe exclude the person that's got a grad party, but you also don't want somebody setting up shop on public land. So I think, I'm hearing some consensus that there's not a hard no. I think the only thing that I would wonder is if the council would like the city to take the lead on this to retain the control of the ordinance development. If that's the case, then I think I at least have enough direction to put together some draft bullet points and things that we can seek policy direction from either you or the planning commission on to kind of keep this moving.
I would agree, and I think it should be city-led, just so we can have the first draft to be what is perhaps the most comprehensive, and to address the areas of, we know our code unlike anybody else, and so we can address what fits and what kind of needs to be specifically addressed. And I'd rather see that than have language suggested elsewhere. As it relates to, I'd rather, if there's a way for this to be without some sort of a license registration, that we just administratively allow for it, I think that is the least burdensome. It's also the least, we spend a lot on licensing, and that's a there are areas where we specifically have to do it, that if we have areas of discretion and we don't need to create a license process, I'm not seeing a reason to do a separate license process, assuming that, you know, these businesses are already licensed by the county and they've gone through that red tape. I'd rather not double up and create a separate city level license process.
One of the challenges just with that is making sure they conform to any of the standards we put in place. And so, but sometimes your license process can be administrative. You come to City Hall, maybe it's a low fee or a no fee, but just putting them on acknowledgement that we have standards, that these are the places they can or cannot be. Sometimes that also helps monitor the time frame if you do want them to be rotating, that we have a set date type of thing. But I'll explore the different options that we maybe have going forward, and certainly can bring back some more for discussion at a different point, later point.
And I guess I'd just like to make the point that this is not a restriction on food trucks. This is actually us moving towards bringing our code to what is currently being allowed today, and it's more of defining what isn't defined. And because it's not defined, it's inherently restricted. And so I think that distinction's important. And now let's just kind of land on the right language that works for us here in Forest Lake. Process-wise, so if anyone's watching this and of interest, so process-wise, Abby, I'm assuming this would come back for another workshop topic as a draft?
It would come back, maybe not as a draft, but maybe some just, you know, if this, then that, how do you feel about X, Y, Z? Before, again, depending on what that draft, what sections of the code may need to be changed. If it touches the zoning code, it has to go to the planning commission. I would say that we wouldn't have something for you for at least another month.
Understood.
But yeah, as soon as I kind of have it kind of scoped out a little bit better, I can give you a better, more definitive timeline.
So if interested parties are looking to make comment or see, to the extent it would require, if it requires zoning code adjustments, that would go through planning commission first before it comes to council. There is a opportunity for public comment to our planning commission, and then we always have a city council open forum as well, an opportunity to provide comment. So as we have drafts out there, we can get them out and certainly provide opportunity for input, so we're landing on the right language and not being overly restrictive.
And folks can always reach out to me directly, that we can incorporate those comments, at least so you know if we've had those communications.
Does the league have a model rule for food trucks?
It looks like Deputy Clerk.
They do. It would be good. It would be, I'm assuming that's probably the most comprehensive document, maybe not. It'd be interesting, just as this is coming back to council, just to have that as a point of comparison. Not that we are going to adopt the model, but just to see all of they tend to put some thought into the different points that are considered.
Yeah, it's not a black or white situation, that's all there is to it.
Abby, you mentioned in your comment prohibiting the use of parking on public land, and I'm not sure, I know that that's a point of consideration, just transparency of position. I'm not sure that that is something that I don't think we should allow. I think it just needs to be defined, so that if you are parked on a city street in a parking spot that's available, just reinforcement that you have to abide by parking restrictions or whatever we might. I just wanted to leave that avenue open. I also think about the municipal lot at the park could be a place, and maybe those types of areas we would want to be more specific in timeline of what's allowed. But I'm not sure I approach that with an automatic no. I just think it needs to be defined.
Okay.
Any other thoughts as we start?
I just wanted,
narrowing down
just one
here?
question, Mara. Apparently this list of names is all people in favor of trucks, is that correct?
Yes, that was correct.
Okay, so they're,
Sizable,
yeah. Keep that in mind too.
very much. Okay, with that, we will close out this topic, forward to future discussions, and move on to our budget discussion.
Sorry about that.
And Patrick.
Yes, thank you. As we mentioned in our last budget session, we were going to start to look at 10-year plans on different, on all the funds and all our requirements. We're pivoting a little bit. We're going to tonight look at the two capital funds and what they look like for the next 10 years. Next week, in the workshop, we will follow that up with the utility funds, and debt service funds, and try to wrap it all together and give you a one kind of all the things that look like for the next 10 years. But tonight, we're going to go over the capital improvement fund, which basically is your fund that supports your streets, street rehab, and any major building rehabs or constructions. And we're going to go over the capital equipment fund, which basically is the rolling stock, plow trucks, fire trucks, police vehicles. So in your package, you have some spreadsheets that Kevin will take you through and walk you through each one of those and what the status of those funds and what we're looking to do in the future with these funds. So I will hand it over to Kevin.
Thank you, Patrick. So Mayor, City Council, the spreadsheets and long-term plans were included in the packet. I also printed out a copy for you, so it would be a little bigger trying to fit 10 years of plans into such a small document. So the paper in front of you is the exact same as it is in the agenda packet.
Thank you for the large paper.
You're welcome. All right, so as Patrick said, so with the capital improvement and capital equipment plan, really what a 10-year capital plan is, it identifies and anticipates the capital needs of the city. These are usually large projects and require large amount of dollars to fund. And when you're generating these plans, it's also important to make sure when you're identifying these projects and improvements that there's a funding source attached to those projects. We don't want to have a project in the budget without a plan for how that's going to be funded. And when I say plan, things change. And when we look at these 10-year plans, we look at these annually. So we look at what the actual results come in at the end of the year. We would look at how they come in 2023 and adjust these plans going forward. But when we have these plans laid out, there shouldn't be much fluctuation, hopefully, in those plans, because the goal of these is to identify all the major projects that are coming up for the city. So just like the budget, this long-term plan is a planning tool for the city to follow. It looks past the current budget year and really tries to set a path forward for the city for where the future needs of the city are regarding equipment and capital improvements. Just like the budget, rating agencies also look at these plans. They like to see that the city has a plan going forward beyond just the next budget year for how those are going to be funded. So when they look at ratings, what our rating is, so then that helps with our, when we issue debt and those type of things, the better rating we have, the better interest rates we get. So it's a very good tool for being able to show them when the rating agencies call. Also, like Patrick said, the first one we're going to go over is the capital improvement fund. This is our street, it accounts for our street maintenance, our street improvement projects. It also accounts for any large building improvements as well. To note, this doesn't include any water, sewer infrastructure. As Patrick said at the workshop next week, all those improvements will be identified in those funds. So just to keep that in mind as we're going through this plan. And also this, as we get into the numbers here, as I mentioned before, all those expenditures are going to have a planned funding source. So when we look at the capital improvement fund, there's a couple goals that we wanted to have here. We want to make sure we maintain a positive cash balance. That seems obvious, but it all goes back to making sure that there's revenue there and cash available for when the city wants to do these improvements. We don't want to be in a position where we're planning on using cash and then there's not cash there and maybe bonding is not a great option at that point, or you have to go through the bonding process and you have to delay those type of purchases. So we want to make sure that that cash balance and those cash reserves and those funds are maintaining there so we can fund those when the projects are there. And with that said, we also want to make sure that those reserves are there for any unplanned expenditures. Kind of like Ryan mentioned before, you can plan and scope out projects the best, but until you actually get a shovel in the ground and dig, you might see some unforeseen things that come up. And for example, if the city bonds for certain costs and the bonds are issued and the project's going and there's change orders, we need to have cash there to be able to fund those change orders. So with that, that's just a little bit on the capital improvement fund. So now we're going to look at more of the number side of the world with how that fund's looking. On the first page is a summary of all the revenues and expenditures in that fund. The second page in your packet and also your printout is more detailed of the projects. And I'll reference page 2 there where you can see on the left-hand side, like state aid maintenance fund. So we look at the amount that we're going to get for state aid funding for maintenance and match up the projected dollar amount that we're going to get for maintenance aid. And basically that's our maintenance budget for the year. And then that's where Ryan and Dave will look at and see where those maintenance dollars need to be used to make sure that they're going to the right, the proper use and the most efficient use for the city. And then so forth down on the next one, local street maintenance projects. These projects are funded by franchise fees and property taxes. So between the franchise fees and property taxes, we're budgeting out over the 10 years, $770,000 for franchise fees. That's a pretty consistent amount as we go. It does fluctuate somewhat just depending on energy use in the city. But when you look at an average over the years, that's a good number for where the city can expect that to be. The other one here is the property tax revenue. There's a property tax revenue of 200,000 property tax levy proposed in 23, which is the same as well as in 22 of 200,000. This levy is projected out the next 10 years to remain flat. When we look at the levy here, what we're trying to do with this fund and the equipment fund when we get there is keep that levy at a pretty consistent amount. What we try to alleviate is the big ups and downs of this fund. We don't want to have to increase it large one year, then bring it back down, bring it back up. We'd like to just have that levy be pretty flat amount or very small or nominal increases. So based on our projections right now, we're keeping that levy flat at 200,000 in this fund. Now there could be changes in that depending on how the next 2-3 years go. But with that said, when I looked at this fund and Patrick, along with our departments, Ryan and Dave, we felt that that was a good number. We felt like if there are any increases, it would be a small nominal one, just as what we're striving to do. The next line is the state aid cooperative agreements. That's our state aid for projects. Those are projects identified for those and the state aid that we get for those. And then the last one, funding, is our reconstruction projects. These are the big projects where the whole road gets ripped up, all the infrastructure underneath is getting done. And the portion you're seeing here is just the street portion. Again, the water and sewer portion, all those costs are in the water and sewer fund, which you'll see next week. These are the projects where if you go back to the summary page, are that bond proceeds. We are planning on issuing debt to be able to fund those reconstruction projects. And based on that, so the bond proceeds equal the reconstruction projects. And just to take a step back, I got a little bit ahead of myself. In 2022, you do see bond proceeds of about just over 1 million. Those are actual bond proceeds that were issued in 2019. So that's not any new debt or any new money that we will be issuing. Those that bond money is currently sitting in a separate fund currently, so those funds will be moved over to this fund to help fund the project costs. So just wanted to point that out, that that's not any new money. So the bond proceeds line item, it's all your street reconstruction projects. The surface water management portion of these reconstruction projects are in this fund as well, and those are rolled into the projected bond issuances as well. And then the other big line item in this fund is a public works facility. Looking at the needs of constructing a new public works facility to better suit the needs currently of the city and also the future needs of the city with the future development and growth there as well. So those are rolled up into having to issue debt for that building as well, if that's a route that the city is going to go. There is need for a new facility with that, so there's specific questions there. Dave can answer those on there. But this, when we look at this and what our revenue sources are and where the project's going, we're determining where we're issuing bonds. So right now, if we took those bond proceeds out, the bottom line on that spreadsheet, you can see where the projected ending cash is. If you take out those bond proceeds line items, those projects are unfunded. So the only other option then to get those funded with cash reserves would to have a significant increase in the tax levy, which is just not an option. So that's why the staff, for those particular types of projects, are recommending or planning to issue those bonds in the future. So I know that's a lot of information all at once there. I'll stop there with that fund and answer any specific questions about that fund, and then move on to the capital equipment fund once we get those answers. If there's any direction that Mayor and City Council would like to offer.
On the capital improvement fund, I noticed, I'm just kind of running through our ongoing list of projects and just seeing where things are slotted. I noticed that at the bottom of the reconstruction projects bond proceeds, like the bottom 4 aren't on here. It's the North Shore Trail and the Harrow Avenue projects. Are those included in a different total, or?
So those totals I just have rolled up on the expenditure on the first page in 2022. Those are rolled up in the North Shore Circle and then that capital outlay amount. Those are what the projected totals are going to be for 2022.
Yeah, those roll up into the reconstruction project line item. They should equal on the first page.
So
So if you go to the bottom of the second page where it says 2.75 million for that reconstruction, and then followed by 5.650.
oh, you know what? I'm sorry. The ones I'm referring to are beyond 10 years. So am I reading this right? Like North Shore Trails 2037, so it's not even on here.
Correct.
That is correct.
That-
When Ryan,
that's-
when I was working with Ryan on this, he knew that those were coming up, and just, it's more of a comprehensive approach that
I
we
love it.
know these
Nope,
are coming up.
It's good.
They're gonna have to be there, so if Ryan goes somewhere, I go somewhere, just that they don't get lost sight of this. So this is the 10 years. There's a lot of information that we discussed and have that go beyond 10, but
Understand.
that's a line item I probably could have taken off of this for
No, don't take
presentation.
it off, because council gets asked this question, like, when are you gonna fix North Shore Trail? And it is good to see, it is on a plan for 2037. Well,
Just to quickly add to that, it's broken in 4 segments, so
Right.
there's other
I'm glad
areas
you
that
added that
are
definition. Yeah,
programmed previously. The last segment is programmed in 2037.
I'm glad you added that point of clarification, because there is, again, 2025 North Shore Drive reconstruct. So that's when we get started, and then it's finished in essentially 2037, because it is broken up into segments. So that information alone is just helpful to where does it fit on the plan? Is it in 10 years? In my opinion, we should keep this on, because again, we have not had this level of planning in a very long time, if ever. So I think it's good to have the transparency.
Yeah, I'd just like to comment on the Public Works facility. I think it's really time for us to look at that. When we get to the capital equipment, we should be able to extend some of that equipment if we're parking all the equipment inside the building. We should also, if you've walked around the Public Works and how tight it is to put trucks in the building, but also we have 3, 4, 5, 6 different places we store material because we don't have the room to that. So we have workers going from one place to another to pick up supplies and wasting time. So I think if anybody walks the Public Works facility, I think you'll pretty much see the immediate need for that. in addition, that we continue to say we're growing and we're going to need a better facilities. And I think it's time to look at the Public Works building. The other advantageous thing about that is that if we do build a new building and move out, we can always open up that facility for redevelopment whenever the time is ready.
And that facility, so is 2024, looks like it's $50,000. Is that the beginning of the design
Yeah, the
process?
2024 starts the conceptual portion of the building. 25 is probably plans, specs and things, and then 26 and 27 would be construction.
So if that is the proposed kind of timeline, so I agree with you, Patrick, that as council, we need to kind of have a discussion and to kind of green light the future plans, because I suspect there's a fair amount of upstream, consideration. So perhaps that's part of the 2023 work plan, is us to kind of work through that as council.
Correct.
At a more detailed level.
Also note on that Public Works facility that is split between this fund, and then there is allocation to the water and sewer fund as well. So right now, the total is 20 million total for that facility between those three funds. So I think there's about 10 million or so in this fund, and then the rest is split between sewer and water.
Understood. Also, just point of clarification, I'm just kind of doing a review of what's in and what's not in. This does not include anything related to parks infrastructure, because that is all in the park dedication fund, is that right?
That is
Yeah.
correct.
And
Yes, they're
that's-
working on the master plan. That we will not be able to present until after the master plan is, but yes, most of that money should be coming out of park dedication fund. As you know, we have a little portion of the levy going to that. Obviously, we'll have to have a better plan for that when we get done with the master plan, but I don't think we'll be able to see this in this budget cycle. I don't think we'll see the park part of it in this budget cycle.
Understand. And today, anything related to maintenance would be park dedication. Is that
Not maintenance.
not maintenance?
Park dedication needs to be used for development. Maintenance is in the general fund. So now, major equipment replacement could be considered development or replacement. It just depends
I was
on,
referring to.
I mean, if we're just cutting the grass or something, that comes out of general, or we're, making some small improvements, but major redevelopment and probably major equipment replacement should be out of the park dedication fund.
Council, other points of consideration or questions? It's helpful to see this level of detail, so thank you for all of the detail. I know this has been a lot of work in putting it together. I suspect as we start looking at this in totality, we're gonna have some more specific questions. And especially as we start seeing this kind of fit into the full 10-year plan, that includes kind of everything all in. I'm sure we'll revisit this document multiple times, so. But any other questions first blush? All right, should we transition then to the capital equipment fund?
Yes, okay. Just real brief about the capital equipment fund. Just like the capital improvement fund, this is all vehicles, equipment for police, fire, street, and excludes any water and sewer and surface water management vehicles and equipment as well. And again, all these purchases, equipment do have a planned funding source, as we're getting into as well. When we were going through this 10-year plan, we were looking at how we wanted to fund all these purchases. And we had, this plan is going to present being able to have cash on hand to fund all equipment, vehicle purchases, with the exception of the fire engines. As we see from this budget, those are going up over $800,000. To have cash on hand to be able to pay for those when they come due is quite significant. So we stopped at being able to fund everything except those engines, but with buying 2 new ones this year, we should be good to go with those for quite some time. We also want to make sure that we have cash for unplanned expenditures. I'm going to say most of the time if something unexpected happens, You're going to have insurance recovery monies or some other monies that are going to come in and help you fund unplanned equipment breakdown or damage or things of that nature. But we don't want, the city does not want to be in the position where a snowplow truck breaks down and we need to buy a new one and there's not enough cash on hand to possibly fund one, where now we're scrambling to possibly issue debt, and that might not be the most efficient use of the city resources as well. So when we were looking at where we wanted this fund to be in cash reserves, we kept those things in mind as we move through the 10-year plans. And again, same with the capital improvement fund. As we see here, the major source of revenue in this fund is a property tax levy. We strive to get this property tax levy to an amount where it needs to be going forward and have those increases be consistent, nominal as possible, with the concept of, depending on how the next year goes, the next 2-3 years go, adjust accordingly as we go annually. So getting into the capital equipment fund, so I'll mostly focus on the summary page. The second page has every equipment purchase listed on there, broken out by department, and we can get into any specifics we have on that as well. But the bulk is going to be looking at just that summary page. You can see in 2023, for the 2022 levy, there's a shift between the park dedication fund and the capital equipment fund, shifting that levy between the two funds. So for the 2023 levy, we're proposing bringing that levy up to $900,000, which is bringing it back up to where it was in 2021 and shifting that out of parks. So there's no effect with that fund, with that portion of the levy in 2023. The big change on this fund, as you see, if you're looking at that property tax levy, is going out every year. We're proposing a $60,000 increase in that levy annually to maintain that cash balance in this fund. So how I look at this fund is looking at our total revenue line item and just our capital outlay line item under expenditures. That's just a summary of all the detail on page 2. And really, if we're looking at paying cash for all equipment purchases with fire trucks, which aren't in here except with the exception in 2023, which we're going to, with the plan of issuing equipment certificates to pay for those revenues need to be covering those expenditures to cover those costs, unless the city would want to issue additional equipment certificates to help fund those purchases. So with that as well, when we're looking at what our cash reserves need to be, we want to make sure that there's some extra cash on hand. We just don't want to be equaling revenues and expenditures for those on-scene equipment replacements. So the goal in mind to increase that cash balance, as you can see, going over the next 10 years. It does dip down a few years in 2029 and 2030. Being that that's 7-8 years out, when I looked at this, I didn't really want to change the numbers too much more than what it needed to be. Is more to get the concept across that if the city wants to pay cash for his equipment, that we need a dedicated levy increase this year and a dedicated levy increase going forward. There are some variables with that could affect and make that cash better. Right now, when we buy equipment, we're selling equipment and revenue can be coming in, and trying to maximize those profits, looking at trading in versus the cost and maybe auctioning some of those off. So there are some factors in there that could play in making this cash position look better in those years. So just looking at how having a good number of this, say, having that at least that consistent plan going forward, not having a big increase this year and then bringing it back down, and kind of those peaks and valleys, is wanted to kind of maintain that slow, steady increase when we looked at this plan.
I think you said this before, and I just want to confirm. So the property tax line in 2022, 2023, there's that step up from 450 up to 900. That's actually levy neutral because that is a shift from, did you say park dedication?
Yeah, if you
Correct.
remember last year, we swapped the park dedication, because we were going to go with equipment certificates, we delayed that, but now we shifted it back, so
Shift it
it's,
back. And so we're looking at planning from a levy standpoint, really over the 10-year period from 23 to 32, we're going from 900,000 to 1.4 million. That's the impact to levy. And so
Correct.
I think that, and so with that, we will, and when we see this all boiled into a levy impact in the 10-year plan, we're going to see that constant tick up, right, for planned levy. Is that, am I
Yeah,
reading that right?
the plan is to put this all together and show you what the levy projection will be, just like this, just how the levy will play out for the next 10 years.
Is that, I don't remember, I'll get close to the mic. I don't remember that levy impact from previous years. Is this us just being more refined, or maybe I'm wrong? Have we always had that planned levy kind of deficit, or that planned levy, additional levy needed? Is that,
Not sure we had a plan for,
we just not been to
consistent
this level
plan
of
on any of
granularity?
that, to be quite honest with you. We've tried to increase the levy. I mean, if you recall, for the first time, we were putting levy dollars into the streets. We never did before. This was always pretty close to what the levy versus what the equipment is needed, but this is definitely a more comprehensive and refined financial plan for the council to consider. And next week, like I said, you'll see the utility funds laid out the same way. Then you should see a total what added debt service, if we do all the bonding that's suggested, what that will do to the overall levy for the next 10 years. And again, please remind you that this will get, every year this will get refined, another year will be added on, and we'll see where we take it year to year, or you should take it year to year, and always update it so you always are on track to meet those goals.
So the levy increase year to year is about 5%. Is that
In this case,
about 5? Am I doing that math right?
Roughly, yes.
Little north of 5?
About 50,000.
Yeah, okay. Okay, thank you for that clarification. One other question, I appreciate having all of the detail on the second page. Is this, from an equipment standpoint, maintaining existing inventory? And it's not, so if we needed to add another plow truck to our fleet because we are now larger 5 years from now, and it's not replacement, but it's an additional plow truck, that would be outside of this, is that right?
yeah, we would have to add that because sooner or later, we'll probably have to have more routes as you develop.
Right.
We have not planned that in. That's why we need to review this every year to add that. If
Understood.
needed, a plow or a new fire truck or a new fire station, or whatever the case may be, in these plans should be reflected. And some of the other plans you'll see will be, we'll take some growth into account, but it may not happen. So that's again why we have to review this every year, so.
Understood. So this is existing inventory that we own today.
Correct.
Replacement of existing inventory.
I
Okay.
see this plan moving forward, once we get to that point, when we're bringing this to council, identifying if it's a replacement or if it's a new piece of equipment.
Perfect.
So then that information is available to city council. And that's a very good question, a good point. So when you're looking at where that cash balance is in this fund, if all of a sudden we need another plow truck that's now upwards of 300,000, that's a large amount of cash. And if you're looking at where our cash balance is, this projected is here, again, projections can change, but looking in the future, that's a big impact. So that's where, if we start looking at this next year, maybe see we might need to add a new plow truck in 2 or 3 years, that levy increase might need to be more, it might need to be less, just depending on circumstances.
Understood. Other questions as we start looking at the capital equipment fund? And
Nope.
this does include equipment needed for water, to service water? No, this is, no,
No,
An own fund.
it's its own fund.
you'll see that equipment next week in the water and sewer fund, correct? One other item to notice is that all the cost increases. Like if you, for example, look at the plow truck line item, you can see that's accounting for one plow truck a year. Trying to get that scheduled out where we're just buying one consistently every year. That's where you kind of avoid those peaks and valleys. But those costs are projected to go up from the significant increase that we're seeing here. So are those costs going to level off? Are they going to come back down? You know, we don't really know what that's for, just like we said. If we know costs are going to be coming back down some, then we can adjust projection out that changes the future of how this looks. So it's a very important document come every budget cycle that not only are we budgeting for that year, but we're updating this 10-year plan moving forward.
And it's updated using today's dollars.
Correct.
So 10 years, 10 years from now, the plow truck on here for 405 is considered today's dollars.
Yeah, so there's been a built-in increase every year.
Okay, okay. Helpful. Other questions?
No, no question.
Any
Just
specific feedback you need from us at this point, or guidance or input for, as we start seeing all of this wrapped together for a full 10-year plan?
I think that this and the other 10-year plans will take some more conversations between the council and staff. I think, obviously, I think it's important to lock in 2023. But then we'll have to decide if that's going to be, if what we show you in the next couple of weeks here with the other funds, if how we're going to work that into a policy, if you want to work that into a policy following this plan or not. Obviously, there's some big ticket items with Public Works and with some of these levy increases, and you'll see other increases as we give you the debt service schedule, because we're going to be borrowing money, and show you what happens to the overall levy in the next 10 years. So I think there's a lot of conversation. I'd like to know if you have objections or if you have suggestions on how this is going to look, and if this is something the council will be willing and able to follow. It may hurt sometimes, to be quite honest with you, because there's still a lot of needs. That's I think what you told me the first day I walked in the building, but we're trying to finally address those needs and hopefully level out, like Kevin keeps saying, some of the increases that we've had to, and not do things hit or miss, and give you an actual picture where we should be going.
When you say adoption of a policy, is that a policy of financial modeling where we adopt like a 10-year financial modeling policy? Does it attach us to this methodology and not necessarily the numbers? Is that what
The council
policy would do?
always, I would say that you would adopt it as a financial model, with my hope that you would follow it, knowing though, the council's never, they're never bound by the numbers. I mean, you can change your mind next year or the year after or the year after. I mean, we can't bind future councils, but I would hope that you would adopt this as a financial policy plan, whatever you want to call it, that shows you the way, and that you tell us it needs to be updated and discussed every year. So whether the numbers change, whether you make different decisions 2 years from now or 10 years from now, I mean, nobody in this room can know what happens in 2032, but at least we'll have been modeling that out since this year and continue to push that out the next 10 years, so that the council at least, and the public, has an idea of where we're going financially and what the needs are. And that's really the important part. And the other important part is, we know this has to change and adapt, because we just continue to grow, and we all need more, whether it's staff, whether it's equipment, whether it's plow truck routes, whether those will have to be integrated into here somehow. So yes, a financial model is probably what we're looking to do.
Where's bonding money at? What kind of interest are we looking at there, Patrick?
The last time I looked, it was either in the high 2s or low 3s, which is still fairly decent. It's not going to be the 1s and the below 2s, but it's still better than mortgage rates. And we've preached before, the obvious choice here is, do we really jack up the levy to pay for all of this now, or do we extend it out like a mortgage on a house? Because people here in 2032 are going to be driving on the roads we pave today or driving on the roads in 5 years. So there's kind of a cost share with people, not only here now, but here in the future. So why we are a community that has very little debt compared to the size of this community, to the dollar amount of the community, and in comparison to our other neighbors and friends that are the similar size, we should really take advantage of bonding. I know there's a philosophical difference on paying cash for everything, but we can't pay cash for everything. We don't have those funds unless, again, we would raise taxes 300 or 400 or 500%, or whatever that may be. I mean, if you want to raise taxes $1 million to pay for streets, that's what that would be a really hard hit on the first year. So bonding makes sense because you're bonding for long-term capital needs, not short-term capital needs. That's why we're trying to get the capital equipment on a cash basis, because those are relatively short. But buildings and streets and sewers and water, those are 40 years. Water, sewer, 100 years. So why not spread those costs over those dollars to everybody who is going to be a recipient of those services?
You asked the question about adopting a policy, and I like the thought of adopting a policy. So we're covering a lot of new ground, right? So we're starting to close in on the beginning of a 10-year plan. We haven't had a 10-year plan, and it's all, when we're done with this year's budget season, we'll be able to see all of the layers of that 10-year plan. And since we've gone through the work, I do like the idea of adopting a policy, which this is our model and this is how we intend to operate. But because it's new, I would suggest, if we're going to consider having council adopt such a policy, that we kind of step back and just do a round of community engagement feedback, where we just have an opportunity to present it and show it and talk about it and get feedback. And it's similar to a process that the school district would cover if they're going to do a levy, where they're going to do an 8-year levy or 10-year levy. Now that's a little bit of a difference because it's locked in. This isn't locked in. This is, council has discretion every single year, but you are starting to set the stage for an overall plan that I think if we're going to consider adopting a policy, which I could support, I think we just need to make sure we've got the right public input first to make sure that.
I don't
people aren't
disagree.
missing.
Yeah, and I think the other important part about a policy is, we've talked about interest rates. We have a document like this, which includes all the 10 years and has all the funds and everything. The financial agencies will see us as a well-organized, responsible unit that will help some of the bidders on the bonds. When they see that plans, should help our rating, or keep our rating and where it should be. So there's an importance also to publishing this, when and if we go out for bonds next year, even if we haven't got a policy, we will show them all these 10-year plans.
Understood. Other thoughts on kind of adopting a policy or kind of implementing a policy that would kind of adopt this methodology, or other points of feedback at this point?
This point.
Lot to soak up.
All right. Okay, anything else for consideration?
That's all I had tonight.
All right, well, nice work. This is a lot of detail, and it's great to see it all put together. At some point, it would be helpful for just to see what's still on the if there's anything that's known and on the parking lot list, things like, it'd be good to just have that sitting in a visible place. Like, we know that there is probably going to be some projects related to downtown, and I believe anything related to the downtown plan is still on the parking lot list.
Yeah. Downtown plan's a big parking lot list, yeah.
Right. Other things like that, it'd be helpful to just kind of keep it visible, so that everyone knows that it hasn't worked its way through the full financial model yet. It's never going to include absolutely everything.
No, and I think you're right. The downtown plan is an outlier, and so is currently the park dedication fund and the park improvement plan. That'll have to be probably melted in here in next spring sometime to basically complete this. I don't know how we're going to do the downtown plan yet and what the thoughts are. That's kind of, it should be in there, but it's kind of separate. So that's a challenge that unless you hang me because you're going to see all this stuff, the downtown plan is going to be a real challenge for us.
And yeah, and it's always, proof's always at the end, right, when we kind of are able to see full levy amounts circled through, so. All right, to be continued. Let's move on to staff updates, and we'll start with Karen.
Mayor Bain, I don't have any updates this evening.
Sam.
Mayor, members of council, just a heads up that you might start seeing some changes happening to the website. Content's being updated and pages are also being moved now to get to the new navigation structure. I'm working with Civic Plus right now just on the finalizing of the new design for the new site. So we're still on track for end of year deployment. But if people are going to the site now, expect some changes because we are starting to do some navigation changes and content updates right now.
With the conversations that we're having right now related to kind of budget and 10-year plan, can we just make sure that those are staying in a place that is easily accessible, even if it were from a card that links to all, I know we've got all the budget documents, they're just not always easy to find. So it's that time of year, so it'd be good to make sure that that's all visible. Anything else for Dan? Abby?
No special report.
Patrick?
Just that we started negotiations on the police contract last Friday. We made some progress. Reconvene that in October, mid-October, to continue that discussion.
Good. Yeah, Peter?
Your Honor, Council, at the special meeting you have in a couple of evenings, you'll get to meet my partner, Corey Land. She's a fantastic attorney. She does these kinds of trainings around the state. And if you don't tell her I told you, she's a big reason why I came to Levander, the chance to work with a lawyer like her. So I'm glad you're going to get to meet her.
She leads the League of Minnesota Cities elected official training every year. And she does a great job. So look forward to Wednesday. Dave?
No updates from me this evening.
All right. Ryan?
No specific updates unless you have any questions.
All right. Chief Peterson?
Just a couple updates for you this evening. As you know, school's back in session as of last week. We have 3 school resource officers that work with our Forest Lake schools, and we also had some extra patrols out last week to ensure traffic control and a smooth transition, getting those kids back into school, and everything went well. And then last, the speed trailer unfortunately is out of service right now, so you probably haven't seen it out there in the last couple of weeks. We're waiting on parts. And as soon as they come in, we'll get that back out there again. All weather still operates with us. Other than that, nothing else for updates unless you have questions.
If time allows, once traffic starts to settle down in some of the major intersections, doing some neighborhood enforcement around school drop-off time would also, I think, be good. There's main thoroughfares are busy, and there's lots of the side streets that are getting a fair amount of heavy traffic. So. Chief Newman.
Mayor, members of council, no updates.
Kevin, anything further?
No other updates, thank you.
All right, very good. All right, bring back to council for updates. Councilmember Munson?
No update for me tonight.
Okay. Councilmember Husnick?
Yes, this evening I attended the EDA meeting prior to the council meeting here, and Dan did a pretty good job of explaining TIF. Not much of it stuck, but we did get a lesson on that, so I really appreciate that. And then last Thursday I attended a school board meeting, and the big issue there is like lots of folks, staffing issues and not filling every position, bus drivers, and I think there's short a couple of teachers and that kind of thing too. So also they talked about the demographics, and it was kind of interesting because our city is getting older. I think 17% or something like that, or 65 or over. And that's one of the reasons why school population is going down, along with homeschooling and private schools, and of course the charter schools. So anyways, that was all I have for tonight. Thank you.
Councilmember Valenta?
Nothing from me.
I don't have an update either, other than I mentioned, attended the EDA meeting just right before this. Dan did put together a great video, found a great resource from the State Auditor's Office on TIF. If you want to send that to council as well, does just a good job of just walking through as we start thinking about having TIF projects on the horizon. It's about 15 minutes and well worth everyone's time to just TIF basics. And also look forward to seeing everybody on Wednesday. I expect it to be a fantastic session, so look forward to that. And that being the end of our planned agenda this evening, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
We have a motion, is there a second?
I'll second.
Motion and a second. All those in favor signal by saying aye.
Aye.
Oppose, and we're adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Good night.